Order, order. Welcome to the Women and Equalities Committee. Thank you for coming today. Thank you. This afternoon we'll be taking evidence on access to British Sign Language. We've got a fantastic panel in front of us. Today we're hearing from Dr. Jo Atkinson, clinical neuropsychologist and member of the BSL Advisory Board. Craig Crowley, MBE, Chief Executive Officer, Action Deafness and co-chair of the BSL Advisory Board. And Rebecca Mansell, Chief Executive of the British Deaf Association. Today's evidence will be given in BSL, spoken via a team of 4 interpreters. 2 interpreters will take it in turns, and they'll stand either side of me. Thank you very much. So, on to our first questions. Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to open the questions today because as a small part of my career I worked for the RNID. So it's great to have you here, and particularly members from the British Deaf Association. So my first question is to you, Rebecca. The 2022 BSL Act was celebrated in the deaf community, but there were some sceptics. What's the community's attitude towards the Act 3 years later, and have the sceptics been won over?
Absolutely. The BSL Act was worthwhile. The legislation itself, the ratification and recognition of our sign language, of our culture, was extremely valuable. We feel that finally our language and culture are recognised. It's never been done before. This was the first time ever that our language had been recognised by law. And we know that we have a long way to go. There's different legislation with the BSL Act and the BSL Scotland Act 2015. The Scottish Act is more robust, and the current ongoing potential of the Welsh BSL Act and the Northern Ireland, the 2 different Sign Languages Act, will also be more robust than the BSL Act passed here. The legislation itself, I would not say solves everything. This is just the start. We need to win the hearts and minds of the public to truly recognise our language. That's crucial. That will start to open the doors for those to see our language, to see our community have been here for over 500 years, and our language has been here as long as that. So we appreciate being here today. Thank you.
And the next question firstly to Jo. The 2022 Act does not provide any additional rights to deaf signers. Is this a weakness in the legislation?
The BSL Act of 2022 was a vital legal step forward, and it was an important recognition, and it was designed to work with the AIS and the Equality Act. So it was an important part of that framework. Of course, there are gaps in access, there remain gaps in access, and there remain weaknesses in terms of enforcement in all of those acts. So it doesn't always work well for us as members of the deaf population, and I'm sure you may be aware that there is an additional burden on deaf and disabled people who are left still having to fight for their rights. And one of the challenges to that is that deaf people cannot use BSL to make complaints or to raise legal challenges. And our role on the advisory board is to consider or highlight where the legislative framework is not working or not being enforced, and to make recommendations for change. For example, in November, we will be launching the Health and Social Care Report. And in that report, we are highlighting the lack of enforcement and implementation of the accessible information standards in health and social care. And we have a health and social care subgroup. We've been communicating with NHS England and the Department for Health and Social Care. And there are other situations where there is not sufficient legal structure to support deaf and deafblind people and the interpreters that we require. Very often we're unable to access interpreting services because the legislative rights are not there. So, for example, if I attend a funeral, I have no right to an interpreter. If I want to converse with my neighbours, I have no right to communication support. And we, as the board, hope that our recommendations will be attended to and enacted so that enforcement will improve. So to answer your question, yes, there is a lack of enforcement, but we as a board will continue to highlight that until changes are made. However, the BSL Act itself is a landmark piece of legislation, and as a community we are delighted that that has given us a foundation upon which we can build for the future. And it's incredible that deaf people like us are here at Westminster in conversation with politicians. We now have much more visibility and equity, and we can only hope that the government will use our recommendations to enact change that will therefore consequently improve the lives of the deaf population and their access to justice and health care and other services.
Rachel. And Craig, do you feel that there is a need for additional legislation to provide those equal rights to government information?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important for me to say the BSL Act itself is a landmark occasion to have that enacted. So it's important to say that because, as Rebecca said, it's the first ever recognition of the language. And it is properly recognised by the government, but it needs to be embedded in policy and practice, and that is obviously going to take some time. But we do really recognise it as a first step, and we know there are going to be obstacles along the way. But again, it's the first time we've taken these steps. We've got the 3 years since the start of the legislation, and some people were uncertain whether it will work well, but it has been mostly positive over that time. Yeah, and it has raised positive awareness, and it's creating momentum, and it has brought BSL to the public and political conversations, which hasn't happened previously. So the sceptics have been reassured, but understandably there's frustrations, as Jo has already explained, about the pace of change. And I think the legislation itself, the BSL Act 2022, has received royal assent. It recognises BSL as a language of England, Scotland and Wales, but not in Northern Ireland, because equality law is devolved for Northern Ireland. So obviously, as my colleagues have said, the legislation is there and it's starting its journey. It's only been 3 years.
Thank you.
If I may also add, I absolutely agree with Craig here. I believe that more progress is needed in this area. So not just a stronger piece of legislation, also on the other side, what are deaf signers contributing to society? We know that the Act itself, if we could strengthen it, of course, all in good time, but we want the world to see our contribution as deaf people, like Rose Ayling-Ellis on Strictly Come Dancing, what happened afterwards, her skills, her influence, and CEOs like myself and Craig. We have deaf academics working in universities, we have amazing researchers, we have deaf people in top jobs across the country, and we don't have these jobs because we are deaf, it's because we are skilled and talented like everybody else. We want the world to see us as contributing to society. We bring a visual perspective to this world. The legislation certainly helps, but we want society to understand that we are the same as all of you. We're all human beings. We just use a different language. BSL is an indigenous language of the United Kingdom, of our country. It goes back 500 years worth of evidence of signing in our country, and I think this history, this element is really misunderstood. And we really want to change mainstream attitudes towards that. We want to show that we can contribute to society and believe that's the way forwards.
And if I could also just add something as well, just to answer the question as to whether additional legislation is needed. Well, on the BSL board currently, we are focused on the current Act and taking the opportunity to try and make the most of the Act that we have and advise government to that. But of course, there are certain weaknesses that we would hope will be improved, and that this Act will be a springboard to enhancements that come in the future.
One short.
I will be brief. Just to reinforce what Jo has said, I think the key is the role of the board is to influence on issues within the government department. So that's why the legislation helps our influence from within. And that's why we're delighted to have the BSL Advisory Board in place. And that helps to start the ball rolling.
Thank you, and I think that link between culture and language is so very important, so thank you for explaining that.
Thank you, Rachel. Scotland has already been mentioned, so I'm going to pass to my colleague Christine.
Thank you. Hi, Rebecca. You already mentioned Scotland, as Sarah said, but I wonder, how does the 2022 Act and its impact so far compare with the Scottish BSL Act of 2015 and the effect it has had in Scotland?
So it's clear that the Scottish legislation is much stronger than the BSL Act. So, for example, it brings requirements from the Scottish Government to distribute a national plan. The BSL National Plan means, therefore, that the different bodies, for example, whether that's councils or NHS services across Scotland, they have to include a national plan. And equally, the Senedd in Wales and the Northern Ireland Assembly are both in discussions at the moment to create their own potential legislation for these languages. And their legislation will be much stronger than the BSL Act passed here. They're focused on promoting the language. And I'd like to first go back to actually really praise the BSL Advisory Board and Craig's leadership. They've only been involved for 3 years, and the impact they have made has been transformational already. And going forwards with this continued support of the BSL Advisory Board to the government, we know we can make a robust and clear change into the future.
Thank you. To what extent do you think the Scottish Act facilitated the Contact Scotland BSL service? And has the UK government considered a similar sort of Britain-wide service?
Absolutely. So Contact Scotland was set up 10 years ago at the same time as the BSL Scotland Act 2015, and it's been in place now for over 10 years, and an incredible service. It's been fully resourced and funded, so people across Scotland can contact health services without barriers. But it's important that this is continued to be promoted, and awareness needs to be out there in wider society that it is available. If we look back during the COVID-19 pandemic, across England and Wales, there was the BSL Health Access launched. This was launched by the deaf health charity, Sign Health. And for the first time, deaf people in England and Wales could access signed communication with their GP, with their consultant, with any health professional. And that in itself was groundbreaking, because obviously at that time we had to wear masks. Communication was extremely difficult. To have an interpreter in your pocket that you could use for communication was incredible. I, for example, ended up being in hospital with my son who'd fallen over, and usually I would have difficulty communicating with the emergency services. But back then, because it was via the pandemic, through the pandemic, we had this service and we were able to access communication. But once the pandemic was over, we're back to square one. I can no longer so easily communicate with a health professional. I have to wait 2 weeks for an interpreter when I need an urgent appointment immediately. So the service in Scotland is available 24/7, and we need the same here. We need a similar model rolled out so the barriers can be broken down for us. And I'd be extremely interested for the government to look into this.
So it was available during COVID-19 in England and Wales, but not now.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
So how confident are you that it would be available again in an emergency situation? And is that enough? Should it not be available all the time as it is in Scotland?
I think it should be available 24/7. The government recently agreed to provide 999 BSL, an amazing initiative where we can contact the emergency services at the touch of a button. But then when the ambulance arrives, that communication stops. It doesn't facilitate communication with the paramedics or the medical staff. You arrive in hospital, you still don't have that communication. We need continuity. The ambulance arrives, we still have an interpreter available for us to facilitate communication all the way through to hospital. It shouldn't stop upon arrival of the ambulance.
What, does anyone else want to comment?
Could I just...
1 second.
I'm so sorry.
We have
Go ahead, Jo. Go ahead.
Jo and then Craig.
Yes, just to jump in with regards Contact Scotland. Contact Scotland was funded and supported via the BSL Act. It was the Act that provided the framework to allow that to be established. And we do not have a similar thing in England and Wales. So we certainly would like to see that being established in England and Wales, and we would suggest a trial. We have suggested a trial in health and social care in a specific locality, and then for it to be rolled out. And we were speaking this morning with the Director of Health and Social Care, Tabitha J. She attended our board meeting just this morning, and we received a very positive response from her. We already have very good evidence from the NHS own research that was commissioned in 2021 the rapid review of interpreting services for health care, which was a post-pandemic review. And we have evidence from BSL 999, which has had fantastic take-up. So there is evidence available. And you asked about emergency services, and at the moment, you know, we can't call the gas, the water, electricity, we can't contact hospitals or the council, we can't report safeguarding issues if we have concerns about children or young adults. These services need to be national as soon as possible.
Craig?
I think Jo's covered all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just thank the witnesses for their time today? And my question is to Craig, my first question. The third annual BSL Act Progress Report was published in July. To what extent has the experience of accessing government information improved over the last 3 years? And how confident are you that it will continue to improve?
Thank you. The report published in July has reflected that that has been a falling numbers for BSL communications since the previous report. But the numbers are still high, higher than the first year. It's a shame that there's been a drop since the previous years, and the increase hasn't continued. But we do recognise that there are a number of reasons for this drop. There was a pause in the reporting due to the general election last year, and there were some items that were reproduced in 2024 that remain in use and continue to provide service to users. For example, the Home Office published guidance to support victims of domestic abuse and violence and enforced marriage, and also coercive behaviour, and those items are still used. It's also the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Offices have all provided BSL for the first time, which is an achievement. So the BSL Advisory Board are delighted and that the government confirmed its commitment to the annual BSL report up until 2027, so that's a 5-year period, and that exceeds the requirement of the BSL Act. So in summary, yes, we are keen as an advisory board to see marked improvement in the next report, which will be due July 2026. And we'd welcome publication of department's BSL 5-year plan, and that should help focus the departments on their delivery, because they will be obliged then to update their 5-year plans. So the board are conscious that we need to go further, and we will welcome opportunities to work with other departments in the future for those departments to be able to deliver on their plans.
I think Rebecca wants to come in.
Thank you, Craig. So it's important that there is information available to the public in British Sign Language, but the most important thing is deaf empowerment. We want our community to be included in things that are meaningful for us, not just thinking that translation itself is sufficient. The answer is deaf leadership. We need deaf signers to contribute, to work with government, to inform them as to what works for us, for you to then understand what the community needs. Therefore, the community would contribute to policy creation, implementation, evaluation of what is working for us. So, for example, the Welsh Government, and I praise them for it, has a BSL stakeholder group. And the working language of the group is sign language. Everybody is using British Sign Language, and that in itself is fabulous. It's co-chaired by the Welsh Government and the BDA, my colleague who's in the room with us today, sits as co-chair. So that in itself is an incredible professional space where discussions can be had and contributions can be made. And it can make more meaningful impact this way. And that's what we'd like to see moving forwards.
Thank you. This question is to Jo. And Jo, you already mentioned quite worryingly how difficult it is to access certain services and communicate with the gas board to report safeguarding. So could you elaborate further on what you think needs to change and what we need to see? And can you also set out which departments you think are leading the way in this and those other departments that need to do more within government?
Can I clarify, you're talking specifically about emergency planning or more generally about access to services?
I think I'm talking about both ideally, if there's time permitted to cover both briefly.
Thank you. Board hasn't yet done a lot of specific work on emergency planning. We haven't yet engaged with that topic. However, I think that fits into the broader question of access to services and access to society. So I'm leading on the health and social care subgroup, and it's really exciting that in November, on the 27th, the Parliament will be launching a substantial report. It's 130 pages, and it's a fully scoped review of the experiences of deaf and deafblind people with access to healthcare and social care from cradle to grave. And that's from the front door of the NHS to highly specialist services. So it's a hugely ambitious report with a number of specific, achievable recommendations for government policymakers. And so we're really hoping that that's going to be well received, and there is a clear action plan. We as the board have discussed this at length, and so we've created the solutions that the government needs, and what we need now are politicians to come behind us so that we can give the solution and the vision for the politicians to provide the action and implement so that our lives can be improved. The report was written over the last 2 years in consultation with over 60 different deaf and deafblind organisations, experts, healthcare and social care providers, professional networks, and frontline staff, as well as academics. So it's an incredibly thorough and deep dive into this area of inaccessibility, and I think the board, we've needed the 3 years. We're only meeting 4 times a year and we're all volunteers, so we've needed the 3 years to do this work, and what we're trying to do is set up the foundations to provide the best possible evidence to government, but also include our lived experience. And so that's just how we intend to address some of those issues that you're raising, so that politicians know what we need.
If I could also add, what the BSL Advisory Board have done in the last 3 years is truly remarkable. I applaud them. They are all deaf sign language users using their influence towards government, and also we can do more. I think the British Deaf Association, as a member-led organisation representing signers across the UK, the BDA are extremely keen to support and work with the BSL Advisory Board to ensure that they are stronger and stronger in their influencing on government. So to answer your question, we are very happy to be involved with these discussions and bring the community forwards to contribute to really address these barriers.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. We've already heard from Rebecca about the fantastic difference that the BSL Advisory Board is already making. To Craig first, how would you describe your experience of being part of the BSL Advisory Board, and what's been your approach to engaging with government departments?
Well,
for me, the experience has been interesting, but I think the journey itself is quite impactful, because there's the experience of being in the board, and the board itself know full well that there's a mandate, from the BSL Act, but we also recognise it really just scratches the surface. From the new Act, it's one piece of paper. So it is starting the process, through the 3-year term that we've been with us. The members are very diverse. As Jo has said, have lived experience of deafness. And it is crucial to have that variety of individuals on the board. Deaf BSL users, but also parents of deaf children, teachers of deaf children, representatives of deaf organisations. So having that collective and also the opportunity to work with government departments, getting that dovetailing through the process, so we're able to gather the issues, make proposals, raise awareness about the BSL accessibility. So my experience to date has been worthwhile because of our collective lived experience and our representation as the British Deaf Association alongside other organisations coming together. It's brought us round one table and share the issues. There are bound to be issues that or more contentious issues. That's expected because it's all part of the parcel of what it is. But it's been very positive, but it has showed the amount of work that needs to be done. And we have just started scratching the surface on the journey, but it's in an exciting way.
Jo? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Is that okay? I think, first of all, it is really exciting to be able to provide government with that advice from within, because I'm an academic, and so and a clinician, so providing evidence-based advice is really important to us. And also, of course, we're able to provide that evidence as well as the lived experience of deaf and deafblind people. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, and perhaps has already had the biggest impact, is the work we've done with the deaf-blind community. Now, I don't know if you're familiar, but deaf-blind people who use BSL as well, they use it in a different way. So they may do something called visual frame, where they're signing in a smaller space, or hands-on, where they have to put the hands on someone else who's signing. Now, when we started the BSL board, the deaf-blind community were really 30 years behind the deaf community. We've seen developments in the deaf community that haven't been matched for the deaf-blind people in their community. And so we set up a working group to really focus on the issues of importance. And it's really exciting work. We have already improved the numbers of deaf-blind interpreters available on the register, because originally there were only 8 deaf-blind interpreters available across the UK, which created huge difficulties and barriers for deaf-blind people. For example, with hospital appointments where they couldn't find a hands-on interpreter for months. And so finally they would arrive at hospital, and this is a real situation, and then the doctor says, well, your eyesight's got worse over the last 5 years, we could have helped you, but now it's too late. And this is purely because interpreters couldn't be sought because of the limited number on the register, and there are a lot of stories that have been given to us about that. So we've rapidly been able to increase the number of interpreters on the register, and we've been working with the NRCPD, the regulator, and also the qualification body, Signature, who have jointly agreed that they will allow new people to register in a rapid way, either by accredited prior learning or on a immersion weekend to catch up with the registration requirements. We're also looking at communicator guides who are professionals who support deafblind people with everyday communication and being guided around the environment. But at the moment, there is no regulation or professional register of that job. And so we're looking at rolling out protactile sign language, which is a naturally evolving American deafblind sign language, which is a fully tactile language. It's not an adaptation of BSL. It is a fully tactile language that really meets deafblind people's needs. And it's utterly incredible. But in the UK, we've not had that at all. And so the deafblind community here is desperate to see that implemented. And we're looking at training interpreters and deafblind people themselves in using protactile. And so in partnership with the BDA, we're looking at providing training and developing the capacity of the workforce to provide training for deafblind people to lead this work in the future. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done with the deafblind subgroup in the board.
Joe, that's amazing. Do you have any other suggestions about how the board could become more effective and we could see more of that fantastic work and more examples of that fantastic work?
I think we need strong deafblind voices within the board. We have them. We have 2 deafblind members currently. And we have a member who works as a deafblind interpreter. And the 3 of us together have already achieved a lot. Now we'll have a new board starting from December, and we're hopeful that we will continue to have deafblind representation on the board. Craig has been brilliant in including deafblind people, but we want to see that continue and to grow.
Thank you. On that, Rebecca, the government recently ran a recruitment campaign for new board members. How effectively was this communicated to the deaf signing community and any underrepresented groups?
We've been very pleased to see the government recruitment drive rolled out, and I do hope that the Cabinet Office have received a good number of applications, fingers crossed. I can't tell you how effective it is from those numbers, but fingers crossed they are sufficient. And then the BSL Advisory Board over the last 3 years, and then looking to develop further into the future, what I would like to see is their work to receive higher profile, because their work is so important. Now we can see they're making big impact in government changes and influencing, which is amazing. But at the same time, if we take a step back, this isn't an elite group. We really need to think about how we systematically include the wider BSL community in order for them to work together effectively. But so far, from what I've seen, fingers crossed, recruitment is good for this.
Craig and Rebecca, is there any group that you would like to see more applicants from and more representation from on the boards?
I think basically, if we remember when the BSL Act was first passed and it started to be rolled out, there were a lot of useful learning points being made from the group. So we've had the 3-year tenure. The Disability Unit have been secretariat for the advisory board and are able to make it more open So, you know, we could have a webinar to the deaf community about co-chairing applications. We're also having a series of meetings to discuss, you know, with members of the deaf community. The BDA conference in July, the Minister Timms announced about the applications being open for recruitment. So if you compare that to 3 years ago, when there was very little, it was just starting, but now we're much more open, much more public. So I think, as Rebecca said, yes, the process itself is going to be managed by the Cabinet Office, but I'm quietly optimistic that we will have a very good turnout of applications and applicants ready for the second cohort of the BSL Advisory Board.
Thank you.
And to come in again, I think what's so interesting about our community is how diverse we are. We are truly intersectional. We see ourselves using BSL from different intersectionalities, and I really, really hope to see the new board to be reflective of this diversity, to show all intersectionalities within our community. Fingers crossed.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to talk about this strange place here called Parliament. How would you rate the accessibility of UK Parliament for deaf people, and what improvements would you like to see? And if I could ask that question to Rebecca, please.
Thank you for your question, David. I think that's quite a challenging one. So from your perspective in the committee, do you think Parliament is accessible, would be my question. Oh no, I see shaking heads. Aha, so me too. We've got so many potential deaf community members who would so love to become MPs themselves, who've struggled, who've faced barriers. You may know the former chair, David Buxton of the BDA. So he himself has been trying to stand for election, but the challenges he faces, obtaining interpreters, having to go across to speak to voters and not being able to communicate, creates a real barrier. So I think Parliament could do more to support those potential deaf MPs out there. And I think Parliament as well, they do a lot of things well, but they certainly could do more. So if your Parliament could include more diverse and intersectional deaf people and also appreciate what we contribute, I think it would be amazing. I think it's something that's never been considered before. And I think that in itself makes it hard to imagine how Parliament could adjust to this, to include BSL signers. But look at the example we're seeing today, how fabulous of you to accommodate us here. This is the first of many sessions, we hope. We hope our voices will continue to be heard and to be contributed and maybe influence deaf people to become MPs, not myself, but maybe Craig. But hopefully there are people out there willing to contribute to our great country and make improvements in the process.
Right, and if I may, just to come in there before Craig, I'm chair of the Health and Social Care subgroup on one of the government's own advisory boards, and yet I watch health debates in Parliament that I cannot access. So that might answer your question. And just to tie into Rebecca's point with regards to deaf people standing for election, there have previously been funds available to potential members of Parliament who require reasonable adjustments in order to stand for election, but those funds have been closed. So we would very much like to see the reopening of those funds, because that is our democratic right.
If you're talking about access, I've just made some quick notes. And the BSL Advisory Board have influenced and offered guidance and advice and encouragement to departments. So, I mean, I'd welcome the UK Parliament to create their own 5-year plan. have your own 5-year plan of building in BSL access. You know, we've seen good progress with 18 ministerial departments who have published theirs. So I don't feel Parliament should be an exception. So maybe that's a place to start. I think a strong plan would set clear, measurable commitments to ensure that BSL access is available in all parliamentary business, including improvement and recruitment of BSL staff, and to be allowed to engage in the democratic process. So, and Parliament should lead by example, and to be able to send a powerful message outside of the government to BSL users, so we feel equal citizens and we have the right to access information and services on an equal basis. That's the summary.
If I may just add one more thing here. Going back to being in Parliament, let's think about the parties. Let's go back to the start. The party membership, how the parties themselves liaise and build relationships. That in itself needs to be improved as well. Looking at Labour, all the different parties. I think we need to go back to the beginning, create those stepping stones in order for us to obtain access there.
Thank you. And I must say, it's quite upsetting to hear you say that you think it's fabulous that we have provided these provisions today, because that means that you feel we have had to go further than we would normally do to provide these provisions. It should be, for me, a matter of course that we make this place as accessible as possible. And I'd just like to ask another question around live English subtitling of all proceedings. Does live English subtitling meet the needs of the deaf community? Rebecca, firstly.
I think everything you do is great, but you can go further. So subtitles themselves are effective. However, we have to recognise English and British Sign Language as two separate languages. So in BSL, you'll see the nuances, you'll see the tone in the visual language, which is lacking in the subtitles. You're just taking the English on face value with no nuance. When you see the interpretation and the expression, that denotes the tone of voice. So whether you can hear that angry tone of voice, you would then see that reflected in the sign language through facial expression. However, English subtitles, you are unable to see the tone. And I think out there we have so many varied and different members of our deaf community who have different levels of English access. Deafness is a real spectrum. Some people who are able to lip read and understand English in that way. Some people refuse to wear hearing aids and purely use sign language. I can read English, however, I need sign language to feel fully involved and feel that I have true access.
Thank you. And we've now established the all-party parliamentary group on BSL. Do you think that's going to help accelerate progress here in Parliament? And I can put that to whoever would like to answer. Maybe, okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
The British Deaf Association are truly proud in the establishment of the APPG on BSL. This group will focus thoroughly upon our language, and we are thrilled that it's been set up, and it's really time for us to now roll up our sleeves to really ensure that this isn't about access anymore. It's about the thriving, the promotion of our language. And I want to show a huge respect to Jen Craft MP, the chair of our APPG on BSL. To have her in place, her leadership, her promotion of sign language is hugely appreciated. So huge thanks to Jen. And we are, as the BDA Secretariat of the APPG, so we're really excited to continue our work with them and influencing the attitudes of BSL further in Parliament. So this is just the beginning. Very much looking forward to seeing how we develop into the future.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could come in. Because we've been talking about access issues with regards to subtitles and BSL, and I think it's important to mention announcements from number 10 when they happen, and press conferences as well. Right now, there is no interpreting service provided for those announcements, those briefings, those press conferences. And the deaf community have been lobbying. They want to have access to information at the same time as the members of the hearing population. That's the only way to give us equity and to show respect for us as people and respect for our language. And sometimes there are national emergencies, such as COVID lockdowns that we saw not that long ago. People want these vital pieces of life-saving information immediately, not to have to wait and get them at a delay and rely on other people to pass on the information. These are national emergencies that we're talking about. We want to see interpreters next to the Prime Minister. We want to see this go out in social media at the same time as everyone else gets it. And this is something that's been mentioned time and again to us as members of the advisory board. And we really hope that this will be seriously taken into consideration for the future.
Thank you. Craig.
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca and Joe. I think the BSL Advisory Board's perspective, if you asked me the question 5 years ago, the answer would be disastrous. So there's always improvement. There's always improvement, and it is ongoing improvement. But we need more work on improving subtitling and BSL access. Joe's comment about the number 10 announcements, it's a positive step. We're having dialogue about how we can improve subtitling and Envision BSL in any emergency announcements. But we need to see it as mainstream rather than BBC Parliament channel separate. It needs to be seen on the mainstream access for all, especially with regard to events like COVID and the experience we had as a deaf community.
Thank you so much. My final question is, Craig, you mentioned a 5-year plan. Now, the Scottish Parliament has a 20-point BSL action plan. And Craig, you mentioned some things you would like to see in a 5-year plan in the UK Parliament. Would anybody else like to share some things that they would like to see in a 5-year plan as part of the UK Parliament? Craig.
Yeah, I can start if that's okay, thank you. I have already mentioned briefly, I think the important thing is the Parliament should have a 5-year plan. As I said earlier, we've worked with 18 ministerial departments, so I think the UK Parliament shouldn't be an exception. The Scottish Parliament have done it for 10 years, and all praise to them, they are already ahead. They've gone down a number of avenues, and in the UK Parliament we haven't even started that yet. So I think that's something we need to seriously consider doing now.
Thank you. Rebecca.
I would love to see a long-term, in-depth plan. I would love to see Parliament working with the deaf community to co-produce and co-create this plan. So it is fundamentally from the community in its first instance, for the community to take ownership of their language development and how and what that looks like. I would love to see that.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yes, and I would like to see interpreters provided for parliamentary debates. So I would like to see access on the floor. Hansard is inaccessible, so the parliamentary records are not currently accessible to the deaf population. So I would like to see interpreter provision And I would like Parliament to have its own specialised team of BSL interpreters. This is one of our nation's indigenous languages, and it should have a presence in Parliament.
If I can just add to that, sorry. Go ahead. So I think that one of the issues is that in Parliament we can't give commentary in BSL because Hansard can't record in BSL, and so we can't deliver something that goes on the record in our own language. And so that's why we need interpreters as well, not just to make access for us, but so that we can contribute in our own language as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we've already mentioned one of our fantastic colleagues, Jen Craft, but there are also some others along the way that have really helped push us forward, even though we've got plenty of progress to make. Rosie Cooper, Maria Eagle, Vicky Foxcroft. I think Vicky was one of the first to use BSL in the chamber from the floor. So thank you to them. I'm going to hand over now to Alex.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming in. I wanted to ask Rebecca, first of all, what is it like for families of deaf children trying to learn BSL from a very young age, and how much support is available for children and their parents?
Thank you for your question. So, looking back on my own personal journey, I think will help us understand this a little bit better. I became deaf at the age of 4. So we're talking about 48 years ago, if my maths is correct. So at the age of 4, I became deaf, and later my parents decided to learn BSL. And at the time they went to our local deaf club, learnt some sign language there, and then one day went to an audiology appointment with me. They were having a conversation with the professional. My mum said to the audiologist, "Oh, I'm learning some sign language for Rebecca," and the audiologist said, "No, don't. It will affect her speech." My parents believed this completely, dropped out of the course, no longer paid for any tuition in sign language. And now, years later, 48 years later, have things changed? I'm sorry to say, no, nothing has changed. The same advice is being given. Many parents now tell the BDA that they are spending thousands of pounds to learn sign language just to communicate with their deaf child. They said that they're receiving conflicting information from the professionals that they meet, some saying to use sign language, some saying no, it will affect their speech development, and then they read on the internet that research shows very positive benefits of using sign language to their child, and they get extremely confused. And at the same time, across the UK, we have hearing aids and cochlear implantation available for free, yet our parents have to pay for sign language. This is a structural inequality. So how can our families access both? There are a lot of misconceptions. People think that hearing aids and cochlear implants are the cure to deafness and sign language is not necessary. This is simply untrue. Hearing aids and cochlear implants are just a tool, like glasses. If I take my glasses off, I still can't see. It's the same thing when you remove the technology. It's not a cure for hearing loss. Of course, there is amazing technology out there and it benefits so many people, but it doesn't work for everybody. It's like a gamble. Oh, you don't need to sign. Hearing aids and cochlear implants, that'll do for you, but then later they don't work. Therefore, they then need sign language later, but then they've already fallen behind. The British Deaf Association recently commissioned some research into early years, an early years evidence review. We commissioned the University of Manchester, SWORD, the Deaf Research Department there, and they did a thorough literary review over 3,000 different papers, got the research together to understand what was best for deaf children. And what the research showed, that bilingual, bimodal, bi-method communication has the best outcome for deaf children, and families shouldn't have to go through the trauma and the dilemma of thinking it's either or. It should be both, given free equally.
Thank you. Joe?
I would absolutely support everything that Rebecca has said there. The board has focused on education as an issue, and we've done a lot of work on that. So if I can summarise some of what we've looked at. In terms of early years education, we had a summit where we started to look at language development for deaf children from the very earliest years. And we had evidence from policymakers experts about the issues and solutions, and it was really clear what they said. Well, first of all, that deaf children currently are arriving at school without language. They are not ready for the most basic level of nursery education or reception year 1. They're already far behind with their language. What we're seeing is language deprivation. Our representative, the BSL board representative on the education subgroup, met with Minister Morgan, and they had an excellent conversation about the BSL curriculum. And this morning I was delighted to be told that the National Early Years curriculum, which is the framework used to assess all children on arrival at school and provide a benchmark for expected outcomes and achievements over their school career, previously only assessed English and speech, but now also is able to assess their sign language skills. So that's an incredible milestone. So that's amazing news that we found out this morning. We've had discussions with the Minister, and we would like to see, as Rebecca has mentioned, that parents are able to attend BSL courses to learn BSL from diagnosis, from the child being diagnosed deaf. We would like to see that provided free, because otherwise it's a barrier to entry. And the courses should be focused on children's and families' needs, not on a standard BSL curriculum where people are learning topics that aren't relevant to a baby and a young child in the family. So there needs to be, secondly, there needs to be an improved stream for funding for people to become teachers of the deaf. So that's the education subgroup. In the health and social care subgroup, in the imminent report that's going to be launched in November, we have a section which focuses on the language deprivation I mentioned earlier. We have clear evidence of the lifelong consequences of this language deprivation, and it has a devastating impact on mental and physical health and employment opportunities, and it leads to a real attainment gap. And it is expensive for government not to address this. So many of the recommendations in this report are around stopping this language deprivation from continuing. And what we would like to see are, as Rebecca has said, that at diagnosis, on the day of diagnosis, when audiologists are providing this information, that parents are given information about BSL, and that NICE guidance is created so that clinicians have a clear understanding of what the best practice would be on how to provide information to parents of newly diagnosed deaf children about the bimodal and bilingual approach, because that's of key importance, but also then providing access to BSL. Because technology, as Rebecca has said, it may well break down, and for children who haven't been given both languages, when the technology fails, they have no language. And that's real trauma. So for families with newly diagnosed deaf children, it doesn't matter what range of hearing loss it is, because many deaf children will have decreasing hearing loss over the years. They should be given access to BSL if they want to, free of charge. And the cheapest way to deliver this might be online. It's not expensive, but it would potentially save the government huge amounts of money on the impact of language deprivation in people's lives and over the lifespan.
Rebecca.
If I may, I mentioned the BDA commissioned a piece of research, but there's also a secondary piece of research that we commissioned based on Chloe Smith's recommendation, the former Ministry of Disability. She advised us, if we really want the state to roll out a national BSL framework for recognised deaf children, it's going to be expensive. So what's the return on our investment if this is what we pay for? And we commissioned research from RAND, the economic think tank. And throughout their research, they were able to show the results of at the BSL conference we held in July. For every £1 the state spends, they will get £4 back. And I think based on what Joe recently delivered to this committee, I think it's important for you to look at this evidence and to really implement this as a matter of urgency for access for our deaf children. We know it's important to remember that the current sign language courses, however amazing they are and available they are adult-centric. They are based on adults learning the language. We need family-centred learning in the home. If you have a newly diagnosed deaf baby, you don't want to go to college to learn formal, structured British Sign Language. You want a deaf teacher to come and visit you in your home so you can see a deaf adult, a role model for your child. You can ask them questions about how to communicate with your baby. And it really depends on the age of the child as to what sort of sign language you can change or register in order to, as they develop and get older. And you can also enable families to see the different deaf people within their lives. And having a deaf person in the home relating to the family. We did a pilot scheme of this in England of Wales, so we offered free family sign language in the home at the BDA, and the results were amazing. The families fed back to us saying this is so important. We could get an auntie and uncle or grandparents or a neighbour round here, all of us learning together as a community around the child to ensure that child has access to communication from all of the people around them from the start.
Alex.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. My experience prior to being elected was running a charity for children with Down syndrome and their families. Down syndrome has high associations with hearing impairment. So my two signs that I know are thank you and Santa. But that's not my question. My question is, do you think that introducing British Sign Language in early years education would help children with Down syndrome and a range of other disabilities or communication challenges and help to integrate both them and deaf children into mainstream education and therefore mainstream society?
Yes. This is my area of work as a neuropsychologist. And so the short answer is yes. We have currently separated educational systems for deaf children and deaf children with additional needs, such as learning disabilities. It should be the case that we have a BSL first approach. Why should deaf children with additional needs not have access to fluent language models? Now, of course, there are forms of BSL like Macadam which can be useful for some groups, but those are used in conjunction with speech and they aren't BSL. And deaf children and children with other disabilities should have access to BSL because that's something that is available for everybody. I think it's a human rights issue.
Thank you. Rebecca, could I ask you, do you share the National Deaf Children's Society's disappointment that the implementation of a BSL GCSE has been delayed?
Absolutely. To answer you, yes, we do feel exactly the same as the NDCS. We work very closely with the charity and also with Signature. We wanted to really bolster and encourage this development of the BSL GCSE, and it was such an exciting prospect to have our language on the national curriculum. What an incredible opportunity. But we know that BSL also needs to be taught well. The best guarantee to ensure that the best guarantee of this is to ensure we have deaf tutors in place to ensure this, and imagine the opportunities that would present for us. I think there's a real possibility here to empower our deaf people to become long-term leaders within this BSL GCSE development, potentially being part of the professional workforce, having a career. We're very, very excited for our deaf people about that, but that won't happen without careful planning. So we are really ready to bolster support and move forward with the government on this.
Thank you. The Department for Education first committed to introducing the GCSE in 2018. Do you know why it's taken so long to come to fruition?
There have been a few complications. We think because BSL is a language in its own right, it's not straightforward as English word for word translation. What is your name? No, in BSL it is name what. The structure is very different. So the complications of the examination and assessment process came into the fore, and also the regional variations, like accents. We have regional variations in sign language. So I've got to take my hat off to Ofqual to take on the challenge of this, and I do believe they're getting there. They recently had a consultation again with the community, and I'm looking forward to reading the feedback in order to strengthen and further develop the BSL GCSE.
What Rebecca said is excellent. The BSL Advisory Board are definitely welcoming the introduction of the BSL GCSE. And yes, what Rebecca said is brilliant. It's about raising awareness of the richness of the language. But it also gives support to more people in learning BSL. So hopefully it will open up different routes. It will make accessible communication for the deaf community. The BSL Advisory Boards have also hosted a webinar with Ofqual to support their call for contributions and consultation just recently. The education experts and the wider general public meeting together, and Ofqual have been very helpful in enabling and supporting, and their level of interest has been incredible. Ofqual have been assessing the findings, and they have considered what they are publicising in autumn. That's when it's due out. The delay hasn't been ideal, but we know there is a way to go before the qualification is actually ready for students to gain that qualification. But we do understand there's a lot of work to be put in to bring in a new qualification that is live, and we'd rather it be delivered in the right way rather than rush it through just to get it done and it's then not be fit for purpose. So we are encouraged that the consultation has been open, and Ofqual have engaged closely with us, and so we are confident the Department of Education and Ofqual have taken our perspectives on board alongside the BDA and other deaf organisations, and they've listened to the concerns of the deaf community. So hopefully this will help the way forward to be a smoother path for the BSL GCSE to be delivered.
Rebecca?
I think Craig is right in this point. So the BSL GCSE must be delivered well. So the delays have happened in order for the delivery to be gotten right, and I think it's the right thing to do. And the Department of Education, they are really keen at looking at the workforce and the expansion of the workforce. So we're very much looking forward to the delivery of this, and we do believe that the delays are correct and the right thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. We've got about 20 minutes left, and we've got two sections, so hopefully 10 minutes each. Samantha.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Did I say that right? Thank you. Thank you. You have really got me thinking today for a couple of reasons. One, my dad started to lose his hearing in his, I think, probably maybe early 50s due to a condition with fluid in the ears. And over the years, he just became increasingly more isolated. Technology not always doing the best that it can. But my question is about technology, because I feel ashamed of myself for putting out any comms that do not have BSL on them because of what you have said today. So I thank you for that. But I would be incredibly nervous to rely on certain tools to interpret something because I don't speak British Sign Language. So any recommendations on that would be great. But it does lead me nicely to my question. I have a background in technology and I'm very keen on this stuff. And so I wonder whether you can talk about the potential benefits of AI-generated BSL for accessibility. We might say they're huge and you might think maybe they are not. So I just wonder if you could talk about where we might see the greatest positive impact. And if in your answer you can address some of the key risks actually with AI-generated BSL, both to signers and to BSL as a language, and how we might manage those risks, and also what government can take to help in this area. Very long question, but...
Would you like me to start? If you'd
Yes,
like to start,
I
Jo.
don't mind, you or me. Okay. There are huge potential benefits of AI when it comes to BSL access. Clearly, potentially, this is huge. Oh, bear with me, just let me skip through my notes. Hold on. I'll just run back a bit. Yes, so AI can give us a good example of what we call deaf gain, because if AI tools are produced that can cope with movements such as we see in BSL, then they will benefit many more people than just the deaf population. So if this technology is created, it could have far-reaching effects, such as for sports coaching, physiotherapy, gesture recognition. So these technological advances are incredibly exciting. And we would welcome that advances are made with BSL as quickly as possible. This would require quite significant funding. However, some members of the deaf population don't share the same level of excitement. Historically, if we look back, we must observe a note of caution. Alexander Graham Bell was attempting to improve technology to help deaf people when he inadvertently invented the telephone, thereby creating a fresh barrier for the deaf population, which held them back for many, many decades. And so many deaf people are fearful that new barriers will be created with the advancements of AI. So we don't want new technology if it only creates new barriers, and we don't want it to be rushed to be implemented and then we realise too late that these barriers have emerged. So what's vital is for those creating these new technologies to work with the deaf population. Deaf people need to have input, they need to have a voice in the developmental stages so that such barriers don't emerge. Deaf people and deaf-blind people need to have choices. They need reasonable adjustments to be made to allow their accessibility as a human and not be forced to use technology if they don't wish to do so. So, you know, we've seen across the mainstream world, we now have driverless cars, and they are only going to be accepted when the population is ready for them. And so we can't be forced to adopt new technology if we don't feel ready. The technology needs to be able to cope with natural language. And if the technology produces sign language, it needs to be intelligible. It needs to be accurate. So I think that what's required here would be a government level framework to enforce technology companies to respect the community and respect the language. For example, machine translation needs to be respectful of BSL. We can't, the input, the data that's used for the machine learning needs to be fluent natural data, and it needs to take into account the spectrum within the deaf community, because deaf people use language at different levels. And as we've heard, there are also regional variations. So we don't want AI to be London-centric, for example. It needs to take into account different regional variations. It also needs to account for different physicalities, because people have their own idiosyncratic use of language depending on their physical capabilities, and AI needs to account for that also. So it needs to be both fluent and accurate. It also needs to be safe, because when you're using people's bodies, you encounter safeguarding issues. It needs also to be inclusive. So I would say it needs not to be rushed, and it needs only to be launched in a wider sense with the agreement and approval of the deaf population. Our board has begun looking at this in depth and consulting with industry experts, which I'm sure Craig can talk to more. So we're establishing some measure of foundational research so that in the future we can establish some guidelines. And in the next iteration of the board, I'm sure there will be further collaboration, hopefully with government departments, in order that this evolution can take the appropriate course. And my colleague will just add.
And I think two things. The first is that it mustn't be introduced just as a cost-cutting method by government, that it needs to be something that's introduced as something that's of genuine benefit. And secondly, that the quality of AI avatars at the moment is not sufficient. Although it may look as if it is to hearing people looking at it, currently it's not in fact usable, and so it shouldn't be being deployed at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Joe, for your contribution there. Very valuable. Millions of pounds has been invested in various different grants through UKRI and also Innovate UK, distributed to develop AI BSL. The BDA receives many, many requests for partnership in this area, and upon first glance, this was around a year ago, we thought, oh, really interesting, let's meet them. Had a phone call via video call, and they said, oh, we've got this product for AI on BSL, it's going to resolve all your communication issues, but they couldn't sign. The people developing this technology had no knowledge about BSL, deaf culture, deaf history. They were completely naive as to our language, but they're telling us that they've got these amazing gloves, but they know nothing about the language it's designed to replicate. So how do they design the AI? They're thinking about the potential from that funding in order to commodify our language, essentially. And that's taxpayers' money wasted on these companies who know nothing about our language. We need to seriously go back and be careful as to the right processes set up in place when you are deciding on an investment. So with AI on BSL, the deaf community need to be involved and need to be part of the decision-making process, not be with those people who know nothing about our language and culture. At Cambridge University, they have a organisation called Mindaroo, who are looking at AI ethics in AI. They recently were involved in a few of our meetings at the BSL Alliance. We have 64 different partners, BSL-led organisations across the UK joining around the table, having discussions as to what the issues we are facing with regard to AI on BSL. And they produced a report called BSL is Not for Sale. This was launched last Thursday, and it is truly incredible, this report. I am so grateful for their observations, the struggles that we're facing in this market as BSL signers. So I would very much recommend that the committee do read through this Minderoo report. They talk about the procurement process as one element. Deaf signers need to be involved in the co-design and the co-creation so we can contribute as to what works for us to those who don't know, who don't respect our language and who just want to commission on our behalf.
Samantha, have you got any?
I think that pretty much covered up the second section as well. Too. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Craig.
Can I just come in with one point, if I may? Apologies. Just picked up on something that Joe and Rebecca have mentioned. I think it's important to say the BSL Advisory Board have a technology subgroup and that we have implemented. And the whole purpose of that is to gather the findings and information and also look at reports and research and to make those collaborations with the companies, the developers, the designers who are working on this technology. Minister Timms has really wanted to see some AI developments on the basis that deaf people are in the driving seat. They're in the forefront. Joe also pointed out that the group's aim is to establish a framework. So what's Rebecca was saying about ethics is so important. It has to be co-produced and co-designed. That is important. So the BSL Advisory Board's role is to see and ensure that the framework is in place. And then all parties are being supported in working together in a collaborative way. So I think that's a summary.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I think it's important that we have clear principles in place here to guide policymakers. So therefore we can create these ethical frameworks because these are not yet in place. This needs to be urgently addressed. So I would encourage you to work with Minderoo in order to develop this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Samantha. Kiris.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Craig, and we're moving on to sport. Could you explain why there are no deaf or hard of hearing categories in the Paralympic Games, and whether deaf people tend to prefer having their own international sporting event, so the Deaflympics?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to talk about the Deaflympics itself. It has been officially recognised by the International Olympic Committee since 1955. The UK government stopped the funding. Since then, the UK deaf sports and athletes have continued to struggle for recognition and for financial support. I should declare my background. I am a Deaflympian myself. Silver medal winner a long time ago, but thank you, it was a long time ago. I'm also founding chair of UK Deaf Sports 20 odd years ago, and I also am former president of the International Committee for Sports of the Deaf, the Deaflympics, for 4 years. So, yeah, I can say the deaf athletes, the Deaflympics, not being part of the Paralympics, because there's no classification system for hearing loss within that movement. In the Deaflympics, there is only one category, and that is having a hearing loss to 55 dB in both ears, and that allows athletes to compete. What many people don't realise is that deaf athletes have created their own games. The Deaflympics was established in 1924, and it is the world's oldest disability sports movement. And the UK was one of the founding members of that new organisation. So deaf athletes prefer their own Olympics, well, many do, because it's genuine, level playing field because of shared communication, language, culture, and also competing at a high level. In the UK, the Deaflympics still lacks recognition and funding. It's not like the Olympics and Paralympic athletes. So the key barriers to the deaf athletes is being able to reach that elite level and gaining the recognition, and also the visibility and therefore the funding. Alongside, it's about accessibility of coaching and tournaments, but it's about the recognition of the Deaflympics that is absolutely essential, to allow deaf athletes to thrive. As co-chair of the BSL Advisory Board, I should emphasise that it shouldn't be directed at the board. I respectfully request that the UK Deaf Sports Chair and their CEO, Chris Radcliffe, along with DCMS, Department of Culture, Sport and Media, and the British Paralympic Association are the best people to provide more detailed answers and solutions going forward.
I have great admiration for UK deaf sport, and thank you for founding it so many years ago, Craig. We are one of the founding, we contributed an athlete in 1924 from the BDA. I was reading about the history of our place in the Deaflympics. We have been involved, for nearly 100 years, a long history. But I think what's more disappointing is that our athletes have to fundraise themselves. So to go to the Olympics in Japan this year, they've had to raise over £4,000 each just to go and compete. They want to represent their country. They want to represent Great Britain on the grand stage. And it's a real honour to have that place, as you did yourself, Craig. And we understand that the funding has been withdrawn due to no compromise. But the policy itself actually focuses on medal winners. However, on that basis, the athletes still went and they still won medals. The last Deaflympics, we won 3 gold, 1 silver and 5 bronze. And that is just from funds raised by the athletes themselves. With more investment in this, they would be able to win more medals. And when they're there, they have a shared culture going back 100 years. So it's really important that DCMS recognise this as intangible cultural heritage of our deaf people, being amongst people who are same-minded. No other athletes are part of that sort of community. In races, you'd use visual cues, no whistles. That's a very unique aspect of the Deaflympics, and it needs to be promoted and celebrated. We have so many amazing athletes in this country that we want to spotlight, and it's wonderful to see the Paralympics on TV, to see that sort of recognition. However, the Deaflympics do not have the same level, especially with regard to investment in the Special Paralympics. Why has ours been withdrawn? We want to be invested upon on an equal level and really bolster and encourage and grow our deaf athletes and grow that area of professionalism in our community.
The point you made earlier about role models, doesn't it, Rebecca? So having that visual representation and having those role models available is hugely important. Thank you. I wanted to touch on funding a little bit more. So you've mentioned funding issues. Does the BSL Advisory Board have a view on funding for deaf sports, and have any representations been made to ministers on this issue, and has there been any progress?
Yeah, I can answer that. There has been some progress made. Minister Timms has written to DCMS and arranged a meeting and inviting DCMS to the BSL Advisory Board, and also inviting UK deaf sport representatives to those discussions. The BSL Advisory Board recommend that we enable DCMS to talk to UK Deaf Sport directly, have those discussions. We have explained the importance of recognition and visibility, as Rebecca rightly said. That is crucial. You know, we've been waiting for this. I think the funding was cut in 2008, and we've been waiting for this ever since. You can't believe how long it's been without any funding at all, you know, and athletes having to raise funds themselves. So the BSL Advisory Board aren't in a position to put any pressure on, but we want to pass on and promote the importance of the recognition for deaf sport and deaf athletes to DCMS, and DCMS need to look closely into that with UK Deaf Sport.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you. I have one more question. It's about health. We're doing an inquiry into young people's reproductive health, and we will be hearing from young women suffering with endometriosis. It would be really great if there's anybody that you know that would like to take part in a roundtable that we're having, that is experiencing difficulties with diagnosis, with treatment, just being heard and listened to by their doctors as well.
Well, oh, absolutely. In our work on the board, we have already facilitated a number of roundtables, and as an example, the Department for Health and Social Care have a strategy with regards to men's health. And we facilitated a round table that we joined, and we took a bilingual approach to that, and we facilitated that alongside the Department for Health and Social Care. And we prepared a document submission which was welcomed by them. That was a very important piece of work because we already know that deaf men are more vulnerable to abuse, sadly, and that needs to be addressed immediately. And we've mentioned intersectionality. The councils do have a level of funding to address health, domestic violence, etc. And that can often be focused on women because you sort of tick two intersectional boxes with women, and therefore deaf men are often neglected when it comes to funds and funding their needs. So yes, we would love to engage with you on this specific topic, absolutely.
And if I may add, absolutely, I would encourage you to talk to our friends at Sign Health, the National Deaf Health Charity. They support a wide range of different health issues for deaf sign language users, and then definitely women, focusing on the diversity of our female deaf signers. They hold workshops, and potentially you could meet with them to discuss women's issues. But what I would like to do is reinforce that overall deaf mental health is worse than the general population because of the issues that we incur in access to information, resources, advice, the delays in consultation and so on. You know this because we've spoken about it earlier. For diabetes, I think a deaf person is 2 or 3 times more likely to have diabetes and heart disease and obesity. There's a range of things here, and endometriosis itself, I think, yes, definitely working with Sign Health and definitely women to support you to answer your questions in this committee, definitely.
That's great. Thank you so much. On behalf of all of the committee, I want to say thank you to our fantastic panel of experts. It's been truly enlightening. I know I'm going to be Googling regional BSL accents at some stage. And thank you very much to the team here as well. And we will, I just want to say a massive, massive thank you because this has been one of the most engaging, enlightening sessions that we've had, and I want to continue that relationship between us and you. So thank you very much. This brings this session to a close. Order, order. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.